Hey nerds, we're going to do a book review today and we're going to talk about The Dog Stars by Peter Heller. This review is going to be broken up into 3 sections. The first part is spoiler free. I will say nothing about the events of the book. The second part, which I will give you a heads up on, will contain spoilers and I will talk about the story and certain aspects that happen in it. And then the third part is kind of just my speculation and thoughts on what I think the upcoming movie, directed by Ridley Scott and starring Josh Brolin and Jacob Elordi, is potentially going to play out like, or, you know, just my general thoughts on that. So if you want spoiler free, stick around until I give you a heads up. If you don't want any spoilers at all, or to know anything at all, or you haven't read it and you're not interested, then why are you here? What are you doing? Anyway, I'm Abby, I'm a pop culture scientist, and this is my review series, which I am now titling Archive 42. So today, going into Archive 42, is The Dog Stars by Peter Heller. This is a post-apocalyptic story centered around a character named Hig, who is grief-stricken and traumatized after a global disaster. The only things he really has to live for are his dog Jasper, his aggressive but helpful neighbor Bangley, and his Cessna aeroplane. He is just surviving, and so long as he only takes his beloved plane for short journeys and saves his remaining fuel, he can just keep doing that. But there is this one time where he picks up a message from another pilot. And eventually the temptation to find out who else is alive becomes irresistible. So he takes the plane over the horizon, knowing that he won't have enough fuel to get back. That's basically the general premise, or, you know, what we get about the story just from the book cover itself. Now, something I want to say about this is that this is classed as science fiction, which I don't know if I would call it that. Now, like, obviously science fiction is a very broad category and it's got a lot of sub-genres underneath it. There are lots of things that I personally would classify under science fiction. There are some people who think science fiction is only what would be classed as like hard sci-fi, where there's like really detailed, really explicit descriptions of the physics and the maths and the chemistry. I don't agree with that at all, but I do struggle with a story like this because the only real science aspect of the story is the cause of the global disaster, but everything else around it is much more philosophical or like commentary on behavior and thoughts and feelings and grief and how you survive. So potentially it's like social sciences, but it is very much a post-apocalyptic, maybe somewhat dystopian story. But, you know, while that can be a subgenre of science fiction, I kind of think it's its own category itself. So I just personally wouldn't classify this as science fiction story, just in the way that I do these reviews. And the reason that I read it was because it was classed as science fiction and because there's a movie coming out directed by Ridley Scott. That's what brought me to it. Now, I don't regret having read it. I read a lot of non-science fiction, don't worry, it's not the only thing I read. And having now read it, though, it's just not really something that I can review from a science fiction perspective, because to me there just isn't really any science fiction to review. The premise of the story is perfectly reasonable. Like, the cause of the disaster and the post-apocalyptic world that follows, it's all completely like sound in terms of just like logic and what happens. It's just not really what the story is interested in. What the story is interested in is a much calmer and solitary journey. Now, there are a lot of blurbs on the front of the book and a few on the back as well. Gillian Flynn describes it as a love letter to things of beauty, and I do 100% agree with that. There is an awful lot of this book that is like centered around the visual ideal of like the landscape and how Hig feels about nature and his connection to the world around him. And it really does feel like the book is written by somebody who has a very deep understanding and appreciation of things like ranch life and nature and fishing and hunting. All of those things are described in a way that makes you feel like the author really connects with it, really understands it, and it's done beautifully. I personally find the style of the book slightly difficult to follow. Now, it's written very much as like an internal monologue the whole way through, and even the way that it's written, like that's where it just gets a little bit tricky for me at times, because there's no like quotation marks around dialogue or anything like that. So there isn't always a clear, you know, he said this and then I said that. It's, you can work it out absolutely from the way it's being described. Like you can work out who's speaking and what they're saying, but it feels more like you're kind of reading someone's diary or following someone's internal thoughts and what they remember of what was said, if that makes sense. I find that style a little bit difficult, only because I feel like you really have to engage with the book and like stick with it in order to follow the flow. I don't think it's the kind of book where like I could put it down for a while and then come back to it later, or like read something in between and be able to like drop back into it. It takes me a bit of time to like get into the rhythm of the style of the writing, but once you're in it, it's very easy to then flow through what's happening in that style. And that's probably an aspect of it that like some people will really enjoy. If you like something very descriptive and very introspective, then absolutely this book could really work for you. If you prefer something that is very like dialogue led, then maybe not so much. Now, another quote on it is Marie Claire said it is a perfectly pitched post-apocalyptic tale. And I do agree that it is pitched very well as this post-apocalyptic story. I was really happy with how it ended. I think like it ended in a way that made sense for the story and for the characters, and like also maybe in a slightly more realistic way than these types of stories normally end. The Atlantic as well, actually, sorry, there's another quote. The Atlantic said it was beautifully written and morally challenging. Again, I agree with that. There are aspects of the story that I felt some discomfort with, but you have to like think about the setting of what's happening and the, you know, what's going on in that moment and what it would be like to live through this kind of world after a global disaster. But I think that the main way that I would describe the book is quiet. Like a lot of post-apocalyptic or like dystopian stories are to me very loud. Like there's a lot going on. This is calm, it's solitary. Probably the best comparison that somebody made is the review that says that it's The Road but with hope. Now, I've read The Road, and The Road is, to me, a difficult book to read. But I think, again, in terms of the style of the writing and the flow of the story, there are a lot of similarities to that. But The Road, if you read it, is dark. This is not dark in that way. So I do agree with the idea of it being The Road, but, you know, with having this aspect of hope to it. However, I also think how you personally react and respond to this book is really going to depend quite a lot on you, on like your mindset, how you feel about some of the themes in the book. Now, another review from The Guardian called it magical and life-affirming. I did not find it magical or life-affirming personally. I felt a profound sense of sadness reading it. That's not necessarily a bad thing. The book is broken up into 3 sections, and book 1, book 2, and book 3. Book 1 destroyed me, like absolutely tore me to shreds. I cried for days. I had to put it down and step away. Book 2 then kind of confused me slightly, because like some of the choices and the actions that were made at that point frustrated me. But then book 3 did definitely bring it back to a place where I can see why people would say things like it's life-affirming or talk about the hope in it. As to whether I can say that I enjoyed it or I think it's a good book, this is an entirely different question. And this is something that I'm actually finding interesting while doing these reviews, is like, how do you express how you feel about something that affects you deeply when you don't necessarily feel like that effect was positive, but it also like wasn't negative, you know? I just don't think it's as simple as saying whether something is good or bad. all you can really do is say how you felt about it, or how it made you feel, like how you experienced it and what it then left you with in the end. I think that it's an interesting story. I think that the story is told very well. I think the descriptive nature of it is beautifully done. And I think the way that it handles grief and loss and mourning has the opportunity to really connect with you. I will think about this book for a very long time. So that's how I feel about the Dog Stars without getting into anything that actually happens. But from this point on now, I am going to talk about some of the very specific aspects of the story. So there will be spoilers. And if you haven't read the book yet and you don't want the spoilers, or you don't want to know what happens, then this is probably the time to duck out. And if you are ducking out, thanks for watching. Okay, I'm just going to pop this up here. There we go. It's my little spot for it as we get into part 2 of this review. So that hopefully should have given people enough time to duck on out. So from this point on, I'm going to talk about some of the more specific aspects of the story. So if you haven't read it and you don't want spoilers and you are still here, this is the time to leave, because I am about to just go straight up into the thing that broke my heart and destroyed me into a million pieces. That is the fact that the dog Jasper dies. Now, it is done in a way that is so beautifully sad. Like, the thing is, I'm always worried when there's a dog in the story. Like, immediately I'm just like, I'm worried, I don't know. No, I don't. I have to look up that website, the Does the Dog Die website. So if you feel that way about animals in books, then you will probably feel that through this entire section of the book, which is book 1. But I think the reason Jasper's death affected me so much is also because of how the story is structured. Now, we know from, like, as we learn the events in the book, we know that Hig's wife died during the pandemic. We know that she was pregnant when it happened, so there was obviously a child on the way as well. And we get that very horrific moment throughout the story where we learn that he was essentially the one who ended her life because she was in so much pain and suffering. There are obviously a lot of horrific things that the character has been through, but we don't experience those things with him. We get like tidbits on it in these flashback thoughts that he has and memories. But we actually pick up the story 9 years after the pandemic, so we're not there while it's all happening. But the relationship that we actually experience with him in the present is Jasper. And Jasper is basically all of the warmth and love and softness that he has left in his world. Now, he also has Bangley, of course, obviously, but that is a very tense relationship, the way that we get it at the beginning of the book. Bangley is this very hard man. He's essentially presented as a cold-blooded killer, or at least someone who is very comfortable, you know, doing the things that need to be done in order for them to survive, the things that Hig maybe hesitates more on. So Hig's real connection, like his companionship, his warmth, is Jasper. And then Jasper just dies of old age. Like, nothing terrible happens to him. There's no like attack moment or a thing where there's this terrible accident or this horrific event, and Hig is then thinking, oh, if I'd just done this differently, or if I'd been there, if I'd done that and noticed something sooner. There's literally nothing he can do. And that's a reality that we all face in life, like whether it's with our grandparents, our parents, or with a pet. Like, sometimes someone just gets old and there's nothing you can do about what's going to come next. And I think that it probably affected me particularly deeply because my dog right now is 16 and a half years old. Now, she's a Jack Russell. She's still very sprightly, but she has lost most of her eyesight. She's losing her hearing. Life is getting harder for her. And when you see that happening, you do everything you can to make things more comfortable for them, to make life easier. But you also look at her now and the reality of what is eventually going to come. So reading that part of the book, I just found so devastatingly sad. And because the book doesn't like immediately move on from it, like you don't get to just move on and just say that happened, now the story's progressing and we can just forget that it happened. We follow Hig's grief. Like we see the loss, we understand what Jasper meant to him in the isolation of that world. Sorry, the scene is running through my head, you know, of him up at the river. He wanders around in the woods for days afterwards, like he's completely lost. It was so sad. But I also think it was really beautifully written, and I appreciated what the book was doing, even while it was destroying me. So that's basically what happens in book one. And then book two did something completely different to me, because I feel like I went directly from feeling this like incredibly deep connection with Hig through his grief to being absolutely furious and frustrated with him. So after Jasper dies, Hig eventually decides to leave Erie and go looking for that voice that he heard years before on the radio. And as he's flying, he sees Seema and Pops in their little, you know, protected bit of land there. I can't remember, it's like a valley or a canyon or something. And Pops shoots at the plane, basically like warning him away. And Hig's response to this is so aggressive that I just found it really difficult to process. Like, because instead of just continuing on with what he was already doing, like instead of carrying on towards Grand Junction and looking for this voice that he has been thinking about for years, he decides to land the plane, even though he's got hardly any fuel. And he's only doing it because he is so angry that Pops actually took a shot at him. So his decision is that he desperately wants to go and kill this fucker for shooting at his plane. And I was just sitting there thinking like, but he's defending his home and his daughter. You are the aggressor here. You are entering someone else's safe haven. You are the person who doesn't belong there. And if you as a character, like if Hig thinks about what Bangley would do to somebody coming into their space, you think about what you have done to people who came into your space. It was just so hypocritical. It was so frustrating. And I just found the whole decision just really irritated me. It felt really out of character for who he was in terms of what book one did, like spent all of this time with Bangley acting as this sort of like foil to Hig, like where Hig is the more humane one. He's the one who doesn't want to do some of the horrific things that they have to do in order to survive. And now suddenly he's just like willing to throw away the entire reason he left home, everything he has been looking for, because some old guy took a shot at his plane and he wants to get like revenge or just like get one over on him. I was not on his side here, like at all, even for a second. I wanted to shake him and punch him. I was basically shouting at the page for him to just cop the hell on. Like, what was he doing? But I do also think that there probably is another way to read it. Like, he's just lost Jasper. The one thing that was really keeping him going, I guess, and keeping his humanity in place. He wanders around the woods for days afterwards. Maybe he's not really thinking properly anymore. Maybe he just doesn't care what happens to him, and he doesn't particularly care if he survives anymore. Once Jasper's gone, what exactly is keeping him going anymore? Now, thankfully, Hig does eventually question himself and snap back to his senses. So, like, I don't know that I can simply say that the behavior doesn't make sense entirely. I can kind of see where it was going in the story. And it was interesting to go directly from feeling such this like strong, deep connection to him through his grief to being incredibly angry with him as a character. But I'm still jarred by it. Now, book three then kind of brought me back around maybe a little bit more, like, because once Hig, Seema and Pops, you know, develop this relationship and they agree that they're all going to leave together, and they're going to head towards Grand Junction, we're then kind of getting that mystery part. Like, we're gonna like find out what's going to happen, what's going to be at Grand Junction. Now, traditionally in this type of a story, like, this is where you find the community, you know, the survivors. There's always some place in any like apocalypse, zombie movie type thing, you know, there's an island, there's a camp, there's a town, something someone has heard of that people are rebuilding society there, or it's survived and it's reinforced or something. Somewhere that the characters can be striving to get to, and there will be a refuge when they get there. So I was, of course, expecting that at Grand Junction. And then it just wasn't. They get there, and it's basically just like two old people in a watchtower defending their homestead as well. That's what everyone is doing. Everyone is just individually protecting their little patch of land. Now, they've set up a cable to take down any planes that try to land, and then they just shoot the people down who survive, which is, I guess, a bit crappy, but nothing that anyone else isn't doing in their regions. So Higg sees the cable, manages to pull up, and then they land, and eventually they kill the people there and get the fuel. But there's no community. Like, there's no safe haven, and there's nowhere else to go. There's no indication or suggestion of another location to go to. And I really liked that. Like, I think it subverted where I was expecting this kind of story to go, because the answer wasn't that there was some larger civilization waiting for them, so they just go home. They go back to Erie, back to Bangley. Now, when they arrive back at Erie, Bangley has been ambushed and he's been badly injured, but, you know, luckily Seema is a doctor, so she's able to help him out. And I liked that Bangley didn't die. I think it would have been an unnecessary loss in the story, but it did allow us to have, like, the peril that he was in did allow us to have that realization in Higgs that Bangley had become his family over those 9 years. And I liked that there was clearly going to be a connection as well between Bangley and Pops. It was like Bangley now doesn't have to defend everything on his own. He doesn't have to rely on Higg quite so much. There's somebody else with a similar mindset who can do that work with him. It's kind of almost like they ended it with, like, Bangley got his person with Pops and Higg got his person with Seema, the softer, the farmer, the person that can help with the, you know, they have the lambs, they're getting the farm going again. They haven't fixed the world or found the beginnings of, you know, the resurgence of civilization or things going back to normal. They just have a few more people. Their little world has grown. And after everything that Higg has lost, maybe that's enough. Corny again, I know, I can't help it. Now, the last thing I want to talk about briefly is what I think might happen with the movie adaptation. So the casting is Josh Brolin as Bangley and Jacob Elordi as Higg, which I found really interesting because actually when I was reading the book, I read Higg as an older character. Like, I don't know why, but I thought he was maybe this, like, older, calmer, tired, gentle person, and then Bangley was like this young, like, hotshot sort of soldier guy. So I didn't really see them the other way around until I saw the movie casting, and then I was kind of like, oh, that actually makes sense a lot, and you know, cool. I'm a very, very big fan of Josh Brolin. I think he's really good casting for the character. I don't really know much of Jacob Elordi. Like, I know he's been in a lot of things because I see him around all the time, but the truth is, I've actually haven't watched anything that he's been in before, so I don't really have an opinion there on that character yet. Guy Pearce is playing Pops, which I actually think is really cool, and then Margaret Qualley is playing Seema, which I think maybe she's a bit younger. Jacob Elordi and Margaret Qualley, I think they're both a bit younger than I would have expected those characters to be, but, you know, it's fine. I'm sure they'll be great. What I'm curious about is how they'll structure the story. Because the book is an internal monologue, it's the thought process and the memories and these, like, flashback moments. I'm wondering whether they will just play it out in that same way. Like, will it be the today times, 9 years after the pandemic, and then flashbacks? Or will they give us like backstories to everyone and their progression through the pandemic, and then bring us up to the modern day timeline with Hig and Bangley to start with? Will they show us like the sickness happening and all of this devastation that is going on? And also I do wonder if they'll give us more of Bangley's backstory as well, because we do get a few hints later on in the book as to what happened with Bangley, with his life and his family, or, you know, some indication about it. And we of course get some information about like Seema's previous, like what happened in her life. So you could pitch it where it's like parallel backstories and then they all join up, but maybe that doesn't make a lot of sense from it. They might just follow the structure of the book and let us learn everything through flashbacks as we go along. And I don't actually know which one I would prefer. I think it's difficult when you're doing like a book that's an internal monologue, because there's such little interaction and dialogue between the characters. So it's easy for us to understand the thoughts and the feelings and the motivations. It's harder for an actor because they have to convey all of that to us without the words. So I do think it's always a bit of a struggle with adaptations of this style. But I also think because of how the book plays out, I can see the scenery, you know, I can see the visuals, and it's very easy for me to picture it as a movie. Like it's pitched, or it's structured in a way that makes a lot of sense for it to be a movie, basically. Now, I read the book fully expecting that, like, I'm going to read the book and then I'm going to watch the movie. Guys, I honestly can't guarantee you that I will actually watch the movie. It is purely because of the emotional effect that the book had on me, and I'm just not entirely sure that I can actually handle that watching the Jasper story. I know some of you are going to think that that is absolutely ridiculous, but I very specifically avoid movies about dogs. I just get so emotional about them. I just can't do it. And if they play it out in the way that I think they will, in that very beautiful and respectful way that it was written in the book, I absolutely won't be able to handle it. Like, I don't mind having read the book and like sitting with my emotions while I'm reading it. Like, I just don't particularly like seeing those kinds of things on the screen. I was thinking about this and I was trying to figure out like what's the difference. And the difference is that, like, when I'm reading something, the emotion is coming specifically from me and how I'm reacting to the words on the page and how I'm picturing it. Like, it's my connection to what I am imagining in my mind. When I'm watching something that is supposed to be emotional, somebody else is pulling the strings. Like, someone is deliberately trying to make me feel emotion in that time, through not just like the words of the story of what's happening. It's like they're putting in specific music underneath it, they're framing it or lighting it, and you know, it's the performer is like, oh, here's where I cry. It's more, I think it's more performative, which is a really weird thing to say because I'm talking about an actual actor performing, so obviously it is. But I just feel it kind of tends to feel more forced on me, and I almost like rebel against them. No, I don't want to feel emotion right now. Go away. Whereas with the book, it just feels more real to me, if that makes sense. I don't know if other people feel that way. Do you? Don't you? Am I being ridiculous? I mean, I'm probably being ridiculous, but it's fine. But basically, I'm saying I genuinely don't know if I'm going to watch it. But that is not that's not me saying that I don't think anyone else should. I think that it has been very well cast. I think that it probably will be very beautifully done. I mean, it's Ridley Scott. I generally seem to like the stuff that he makes. I really can't imagine adapting this story without following through on like the beauty of the landscape and the quieter side of the story, while also dealing with all of this grief that is running through it, particularly the grief of losing what is basically your only remaining connection to companionship and the life that you had before. So if you like that kind of thing, and if you like movies that make you feel that way, then you're probably gonna like this one. If you're like me and you don't necessarily like feeling that way, potentially not. And I think that it's probably a slightly unexpected place that I've ended up with this book in general, because like I said, I picked it up because it was classed as science fiction and because I knew the film adaptation was coming out. So I expected to read the book and then do a sci-fi review of it. Instead, like I said, I don't really have any sci-fi to review. What I have is a story that affected me much more emotionally than I expected it to. It had this little grip and squeeze on my heart in a way that I haven't experienced from a book in a very, very long time. I actually don't think I can remember the last book that made me feel that way. So if you have read The Dog Stars, I would absolutely love to know what you thought of it. And if you are watching this video after the movie has come out and you've seen it, then particularly if you haven't read the book, I'd really be interested to know how the story felt on screen. And importantly, whether I should watch it. Like, is it a danger zone? Is it going to be bad? Do I need to just like pick a day where I can just freely cry for several hours afterwards and just go with it? And then just also like a slob day, a slob day, just like get pizza and milkshakes and just wallow. Anyway, that's all I have for you about The Dog Stars. Sorry that there wasn't any sci-fi stuff for me to chat about this one, but unfortunately that's what I chose. Now, I have set up a sci-fi nerd club and I'm calling it Archive 42. This is a long-term project that I am just beginning to start now. So hopefully I can grow this into what I'm imagining in my brain space. So instead of it just being a book club, movie club, or anything like that, we're doing books, TV, and movie, and we're just going to alternate between them. So I will always, each month on here on YouTube, I will have a book review, a movie review, and a TV show review, and I will let you know ahead of time what those topics are going to be so that we can get prepared. So because this is a book episode and we just did The Dog Stars, the next book that we're going to do is, of course, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which is one of my favorite books by one of my favorite authors. Now, what's really cool is there is this app called Fable. So a lot of people might use Goodreads, but I signed up to Fable a while back and I'm kind of really enjoying it because you can set up a little clubs in there, but they also do TV shows. So I've already set up a sci-fi club called Archive 42 with Abby James. So you can check that out if you want to join in, and we can do discussion posts and stuff about this as we go along. I'm also going to annotate this. And then once I've read it and annotated it, I will put it on Patreon for raffle. I think I might just raffle it off for like, I don't know, £2 a ticket or something like that if people are interested. So yeah, that's what I was thinking about doing. And then for Patreon and YouTube members, currently we are doing watch-along episodes of Dark Matter Season 1, and next week's review episode is the review episode for Dark Matter Season 1. So if you want, I didn't have anyone to watch it with, so I just was like, I'll just record myself watching it and then make an invisible audience watch it with me. So if you're interested in that, then you can check that out. And what will likely happen is the Patreon channel will have the full Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep book review, as well as the full Blade Runner movie review. But then on YouTube next month, I will likely do a book versus movie for Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep and Blade Runner. It's quite a bit of comparison in style and how the stories are presented, but it's a book I love and a movie I love, so ideal, right? Thanks for watching. Leave any book recommendations, TV shows, movies you'd like me to cover, leave them in the comments. And if you liked this video, then you might like my video all about Project Hail Mary, or you can just check out my review commentary playlist here. Stay nerdy. Forgot to say it nearly.